The future land use map from single-family/multifamily to commercial activity center land use for property described as a tract or parcel of land lying in a portion of the northeast quarter of Section 36, Township 43 South, Range 22 East, Lee County, Florida, being more particularly described herein. Property located at 4120 and 4140 Kismet Parkway, providing severability and an effective date.
Again, good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. Robert Peterson for staff. This ordinance, the applicants are Bill Kina and Alma and Ralph Santillo. This is a 3.3 acre piece of property near the intersection of Old Burnt Store Road and Kismet Parkway. It's in the Urban Services Reserve category, and their request is to amend the future land use map from single-family multifamily to commercial activity center. If you take a look at the screen, you'll see there's an aerial map. There's two properties involved in this request, and you'll see the zoning there. The current zoning in green is agriculture. The current future land use is the single-family multifamily, as I indicated, and they wish to take this, the proposed future land use, to CAC. I believe there's a typo in this slide. There's two undeveloped parcels. One is developed with a single-family home, another parcel, and the other parcel is undeveloped. One applicant owns two larger surrounding parcels that already have the CAC future land use category, and at this time, the utilities are not available to the site. Policy 1.15 of the comprehensive plan talks about the single-family multifamily category, allows densities up to 16 units per acre, or up to 52 multifamily units. Future development would require a rezone or a planned unit development approval. We've provided this table to show the analysis of what's allowed in the neighborhood commercial zoning district, which goes with the commercial activity future land use category. And as a standalone property, it's between 1 and 20 acres. It could be 100% freestanding commercial, a minimum of 15%, and with an FAR of 1. It could be between 15 and 85% of freestanding residential, with a minimum density of 12 units to the acre, a maximum of 16. Or it could be a mixed use in any percentage on the property, with a minimum density of 12 units to the acre, a maximum of 16, and an FAR of 2.0. And there's some details about the setbacks at build-to lines. There are 8 standards, as you know, in the commercial siting guidelines. They are guidelines to consider when looking at these requests. They're not actual hardcore rules. We find the site is consistent with the major intersection guideline, the compactness of the site, the assembly and integration with the adjoining CAC property, and has adequate depth and an ownership pattern that would facilitate development on this site. And the site is partially consistent with the access and intrusion guidelines. The site was also listed in our Economic Development Master Plan as part of an economic opportunity site that was about 2018, 2017, and it's part of a larger collection of sites, 24 acres, that includes 2 other parcels owned by one of the applicants, so there's that opportunity for a larger assemblage. The Economic Development Master Plan stated that this site has sufficient size and access for development, but lacks utilities and may need road widening. Oops, I'm sorry, I skipped a slide. As to recommendation, the planning staff recommends approval of this application. The Planning and Zoning Commission also unanimously recommends approval of this application. In correspondence, there's 1 letter recommending denial, and 3 informational emails were received. I'll stand by for any questions, and I do know the applicant is here in the site to also make a presentation.
Thank you. I now open public hearing. Is there anyone wishing to speak on ordinance 75-21? Please come forward.
I need on the desktop. My desktop.
I don't know.
I just need to get. I know it's on the home screen, if you will. There you go. Thank you.
Find a neighbor.
Okay. All right, here we go. All right. Good evening. Greg Stewart of Stewart and Associates. My office is located at 2256 First Street, Fort Myers, and I'm representing Bill Keenan, who's in the audience, and Mr. and Mrs. Ralph Santillo. I'll try to keep my comments brief. As Bob pointed out, that the property is surrounded on the east, on the west, and on the south by existing commercial activity center. So what we're trying to do is basically amend the map to fill in the donut, so to speak. The amendment in front of you will implement established city goals regarding economic opportunity and economic development, along with a reduction along with the goal of reducing transportation trip ends, vis-a-vis having closely located commercial to residential areas, and of course Cape Coral's longstanding policy towards diversification in housing. We agree with staff. We agree with the Planning and Zoning Commission. As Bob pointed out, they recommended approval on a 7-0 vote. What the amendment will do is resolve an enclave of an agriculturally zoned single-family property into a larger commercial activity center. In regard to staff findings and recommendations, and I think it's important to point out that the major, if not the sole consideration in front of you is consistency with the existing comprehensive plan. And if you look at what staff and the P&Z Commission stated, and I will quote, the proposed amendment to CAC is consistent with the comp plan and compatible with the surrounding area. Therefore, the Planning Division staff recommends approval of the small-scale map amendment. They recommend that because, again, the historic lack of commercial inventory. This fact is especially germane in the Northwest Cape. The site is suitably located on collector streets. Both Old Burnstort Road is a divided 2-lane and Kismet is a 2-lane collector street. The intersection will need to be improved, of course, as development goes forward. The commercial activity center, according to staff, and I share their opinion, should be well integrated into the existing land use. The CAC designation reduces, again, trip ends. People will not have to drive 5.5 miles south to the Publix shopping center located at Pine Island Road and Burnstore Road. Finally, the 3.3-acre site doesn't have any wetlands, doesn't have any flowways, so it's environmentally suitable to sustain development. The graphic in front of you, the survey sketch, shows not only the 2 parcels in question, but one of the applicants, Bill Keenan's property that he owns to the east and to the south. So it gives you an idea how this thing fits into the larger whole. Staff points out it is either fully consistent or partially consistent with 8 commercial guidelines. I believe it's consistent with all of them, not partially consistent, but I'm not going to debate that here. The site clearly has adequate depth. It's compact. It has, again, the potential for good integration and aggregation due to the surrounding land use owned by the applicant. The assembly of the property has already been implemented. There is no intrusion. Again, site access, the ownership patterns. There's a typo on this slide where I say there's 2 partial guideline compliances. Actually, there's 3. That was a miscount. Be that as it may, it's consistent with locational standards. In regard to economic development, again, looking at the city's economic development master plan, this site is the only site identified in the Northwest Cape for economic development. It's a fulcrum site. It's central to everything when you start looking at the whole of Northwest Cape. So I think that's why the city has designated this. The graphic illustrates this point in terms of both its potential primary and secondary market area, how this fits into the ongoing improvements to Burnstore Road and the highway commercial orientation, as contrasted to this, which is clearly just a neighborhood commercial along with a potential multifamily development. In regards to multifamily housing policy, again, it's consistent with 1.7. I've already gone through the inventory and housing diversification issues that the city's been struggling with ever since I've started practicing here 30 years ago. The graphic in front of you is illustrative, but it shows what we're trying to achieve in terms of a 2.7 to 3 acre commercial site with a multifamily condo site or rental site. to the rear of that. Compact integration is a key, and again, it's something that working with the city for years and years is something that I believe the city has wanted and will continue to want. In regard to the goals and objectives for quality commercial development, again, we are consistent. It provides, by solving the enclave, this 3.3 acre enclave, it will provide a unified development, which will in turn allow for a more coherent development, again, rather than having individual platted commercial lots that are absent of depth. This solves that problem. It's consistent with 3.2 and 3.3. Again, the graphic shows how this fits into the area that I just described. It is central to the Northwest Cape. It will provide goods and services in a manner that's both locationally convenient, and basically it's the only site available to do so. I think that's why, again, the city selected this as an economic development zone. Impact analysis, the impacts are de minimis. Staff has done the analysis. These are staff's numbers. I more or less agree with staff numbers. The increase in traffic, I will like to point out that if you look at AM and PM, peak hour trip increases brought about by this small-scale map amendment, you're talking about like 1.2 to 1.3 trips per minute. So again, the impacts on the roads are de minimis. Compatibility findings, staff said there are no adjacent single-family uses, that the project is compatible and will be compatible, especially given the new Land Development Code guidelines and standards. We agree with that. In fact, I can go through a number of slides on this, but I won't. But compatibility from multifamily to single-family is a given fact. It's been demonstrated by existing developments, proposed developments, so forth and so on. So with that in mind, I thank you for your time, and if you have any questions, I'm here to address them.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak on ordinance 75-21, please come forward.
Mayor and Council, John Bashaw, Northwest Cape Coral. I'm not here to object to the small-scale land use that was just brought up. I'd like to go through what I think you'll realize are some pretty strong feelings that I have about how Northwest Cape Coral should be developed. And I've had an opportunity to spend time with many of you, and I hope that has been your takeaway, that my sole objective here is to develop Northwest Cape Coral and to make it an even better place to live. If you would go to the next slide, please. So I'll start with the ask. All I'm asking is that you hear what I have to say and you consider it in future land use and zoning changes in Northwest Cape Coral and perhaps throughout the rest of the city. Staff has done a great job of explaining this land use change. Mr. Stewart has done a great job of explaining the objectives for the property on behalf of his client. But in any land use or zoning or development change, there are three parties that deserve equal consideration. The first is the developer or the owner of the property. The second is the city, and they may have different stakes. The third is the residents, the people who live in that neighborhood. But I'd argue there's a fourth, and that's the brand of Cape Coral. Sitting atop all of those three is, how are we going to develop our city? What is the next 50 years of our city going to look like? Is it going to be sameness of development, or is it going to be something unique that attracts people to our city? I want to put this location into perspective. So on this slide, the property that we're talking about is the magenta U-shaped property plus the beige that's in the middle. And on the right side, which is the east side of it, that's Old Burnt Store Road. Incidentally, the people who have purchased property west of Old Burnt Store Road have paid a premium for that. It is a known fact that property west of Old Burnt Store Road is more expensive to procure than even west of Burnt Store Road. You could think of Old Burnstow Road as the next Surfside Boulevard. The advantage, however, is it's faster to big water. So in some aspects, Old Burnstow Road may have more value than Surfside Boulevard. If you would go to the next slide, please. This is a bigger picture of the property that we're talking about. And what you heard tonight was a discussion about the beige, and I'm going to speak in just rough numbers, the beige 3-acre property that's in the middle. That's the small-scale future land use change that's being discussed. And it's surrounded by 16 acres of magenta current commercial activity center future land use. Tonight's discussion is about taking that 3-acre parcel of property and making it consistent with the property that surrounds it. And I support that. I don't agree that it's the right thing to do, but there really is no way of preventing it from happening. But what I would like to do is spend a little bit of time talking about what does this all mean, how did we get here, and perhaps how can we prevent this from happening in the future. Next slide, please. This is an overall picture of, this is from the future land use map, an overall picture of the future land use west of Burnstow Road in Cape Coral. And from what you can see, it's a kaleidoscope of different land uses. And I think there is an effort underway maybe to do some consolidation, but what I'd like you to focus on is the magenta small U-shaped piece that's west of Old Burnstow Road, and how, in fact, if we take the beige 3-acre piece and we make it commercial activity center to eliminate that enclave, I think we've created another enclave. We've created a 19-acre commercial enclave surrounded by single-family, multifamily. Because north of the Bonefish Canal and west of Burnstow Road, there is no commercial property other than that which touches Burnstow Road. So that's an important point, and I want to reiterate. North of Bonefish, west of Burnstow Road, this is the only piece of commercial property that's not touching Burnstow Road. And you can see what I'm talking about. The large magenta to the right of Burnstow that Gator Slough runs through, that's a commercial activity center land use. There's also a small piece of commercial activity center land use just north of the Burnstow boat ramp and in between it and Blue Waters, the Blue Waters development. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that we have some work to be done in making Northwest Cape Coral and the Burnstow corridor consistent in land use and zoning, similar to the efforts that were undertaken on the Pine Island Road corridor. And as those changes come before you, I would ask that you consider what I have to say. So I want to spend just a minute talking about the commercial activity center land use. So in a nutshell, it's a mixed-use commercial and residential land use that's intended to be at key locations on major corridors to minimize vehicle trips, as Mr. Stewart said, and that's true, to provide daily goods and services to the local community. Now, you heard a discussion about if this commercial activity center is developed, local residents won't have to drive to Publix for groceries, which is 5 miles away. So I'm not here to argue whether that's true or false, but I can tell you personally, I would prefer to drive to Publix than have intense commercial west of Old Burnstow Road. Next slide, please. In the commercial activity center future land use, and Mr. Cotero, Mr. Peterson, I'm not a planning expert, so if I misspeak, please correct me. In the commercial activity center future land use, there's only one zoning district that is consistent. And words mean a lot. That single zoning district is neighborhood commercial. And by its name, it obviously is intended to put commercial in neighborhoods. So from a brand perspective, is that what we want to continue doing in the city of Cape Coral? Do we want to make Old Burnstow Road in Kismet look like Chiquita and Trafalgar, or Santa Barbara and Gleason? I think we want to make it look like Surfside and Gleason. But that's the sort of decision that you will have to make moving forward. There isn't much that we can do about this, but as we consider other future land use changes and zoning changes in the Northwest, I would appreciate it if you would keep this in mind. Next slide, please. Whenever we're thinking about a zoning change or a land use change, I don't think we should ever not think about the worst case, because worst cases happen. You know, there have been some discussions about this particular piece of property, and the comment has been made, well, there'll never be a dollar store there, or there'll never be a 7-Eleven there. Well, those are permitted uses in the neighborhood commercial zoning district. Vehicle refueling stations, retail less than 30,000 square feet. A Dollar General is 10,000 square feet. So as Cape Coral is growing with the notoriety that we have, this is an attractive piece of property. I believe this property is for sale. So we don't know, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't know what will happen here. So as we're thinking about this, and again, I don't know that there's anything we can do about this particular situation. We have to think about the worst case scenario. And this word salad that I have here is really just, what are the permitted uses, not conditional uses, not with special exception. What are the permitted uses in the neighborhood commercial zoning district? I'd like to skip to 2 slides, please. Yes, thank you. How did we get here? As Mr. Stewart correctly said, the 16 acres, U-shaped, was part of the Economic Development Master Plan a couple of economic development directors ago. And what is interesting about this particular slide, though, when it was put in the Economic Development Plan, it included all of the property that's at that intersection. In the U-shaped 16 acres, there is actually residential property on the road to the south and to the west. So this diagram that is shown in the Economic Development Plan is bigger than the 20 acres that you are looking at tonight. In fact, 24.5 acres was listed in the Economic Development Plan. But tonight, what we're talking about, if we move forward with the 3-acre change, we're talking about 19 acres. Next slide, please. There was some discussion this evening about the siting guidelines for the 3-acre parcel, and it's true. The 3-acre parcel went through the siting guidelines. In 2018 and 2019, the 16-acre piece of property was included in a large-scale land use change that was done that was about 1,800 acres. Many line items were in that. I don't believe that the complete siting analysis was done for the 16 acres. I wasn't able to find any record of that. Next slide, please. So how did we get here? The Commercial Activity Center property was included in the Economic Development Plan, and it was changed in 2018, 2019 to Commercial Activity Center. Tonight, what we're talking about is eliminating the 3-acre enclave that was not done in 2018 and 2019 and making a consistent 19.9 acre Commercial Activity Center land use. I don't think there's any way of preventing it. I personally, and my personal feeling, I don't think commercial belongs west of Old Burnt Store Road. I just don't. But those are the issues that come before you. So, last slide, I just want to put into perspective geographically where we are. So that's Charlotte Harbor all the way to the west. That's the estuary. The big canal is Gator Slough. Old Burnt Store Road and Burnt Store Road are there. We've talked about this many times. This is really special property. So I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we've considered not only those three entities, the owner, developer, the people, and the city, but the brand of Cape Coral as we continue land use changes. I want to thank you for your attentiveness and for your time. I'm here if you have any additional questions.
Thank you. Any other individual want to come forward and participate in public hearing on ordinance 75-21? Seeing none, public hearing is now closed. Is there a motion for approval for ordinance 75-21?
Motion to approve 75-21.
I'm sorry, we'll go through get the motion and then we'll go through. We had a motion, did we have a second?
Bobby seconded.
Second, okay. Council Member Tate.
Mr. Bashaw, thank you so much for that presentation. I know your heart and your soul are in Northwest. There is no doubt, and you've shared that with all of us. You were kind enough to share a boating experience with me, and I know that you have everyone's best interest at heart in the Northwest. And planning in the city of Cape Coral has always been a little challenging. There was no plan in the beginning, as they say, and then there was light, and we started planning. CACs are something that were done during one of my reigns, so I understand those, and I know how painful it is. And you're right about Old Burnt Store. It is pristine, and I believe the 7 Islands, when we eventually get to someone that will design and build in there, is going to make it even more valuable and more pristine. The real estate there is just unbelievable at the moment. So I just appreciate how much heart you have for this. And I hope that you'll work with us as a council and with us staff to further develop and plan for the Northwest, because I know that's what you want. And whether or not we all sit up here and agree that you may never need commercial up there, remember, as the traffic increases, you may not want to go down Burnt Store Road for a Publix run. So there always is an opportunity for good commercial. Unfortunately, we can't always say what good commercial is if the land use is there. But we have a city manager and an economic development team that is striving for excellence, and I think that is where you're going. And I believe that they have our best interest at heart and your best interest at heart. And I think that's where we're going. So wherever possible, to create excellence is what we're striving for. I know that's what I want for the city of Cape Coral. That's why I signed up for this last term, is I want to leave it much better than we began it. And I believe that this will. This is something that was done much earlier, as you well know. So that's why I'm supporting it tonight. Get it off the table. Hope for the best. Have our economic development team really work with whoever decides to buy it and move forward. So thank you.
Councilmember Long.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I've got a particular aversion to this as a whole. I mean, I think Mr. Bashaw had touched on the real issue, in my opinion, which is how we got here. And so we're to the point now where it's being sold as an afterthought, as a fill in the donut, so to speak, and it's already there. And so my concern was with how we got there. Personally, I believe that this is the result of what was meant to be kind of kick the can down the road, long-term planning to throw of what is a significant need, is a commercial use and acreage in this city, onto a bottom line to put in the overall picture and say that we have this particular amount of space that's available for commercially, and that we would deal with this, what was at the time a very undeveloped area in the Northwest, down the road. And so I think that what's happened now is that with this rapid growth that the Northwest is facing, we've been presented to face this head on at a lot earlier point in time than, frankly, I think the planning department planned when they decided to throw this 19-acre plot into their commercial bottom line and move on down the road. And so when you really look at the area itself, the compatibility, it's entirely single-family residential in the entire area. I think it's been touched on. I'm not going to beat a dead horse here, but west of Old Burnt Store Road, there's no business for any commercial use there, particularly, and the size and nature that could potentially be present here. And in reality, the site itself, even from an infrastructure way, we talk about a couple different criteria, and if staff can maybe clarify, I mean, we're talking about a 2-lane road at an intersection that bottlenecks on both sides at Kismet and Old Burnt Store. That really seems to be incompatible for what you guys use as one of your main criteria for the commercial designation here, is that it was, in fact, a major intersection. Is there any way that we could clarify how those two coincide with one another, the 2-lane road and a major intersection meeting that criteria?
At the time when the Economic Development Master Plan was written, the intersections were looked at pretty much the same way as to whether or not they were going to be able to be expanded or not, and whether it was 2-lane or 4-lane. It was the combination of the two roadways coming together in that area. The Economic Development Master Plan, when it was written, was completely different from what we're working on right now. For Mr. Hernandez's review, an RFP that we're going to be discussing, which deals with strategies. The former city manager wanted land to be identified where we might be able to have commercial, so we developed criteria for those. So we looked at it really by area and by function, and whether or not it crossed another roadway that had multi-lanes as well, whether it didn't, and so forth. There's been a lot of discussion here tonight about the fact that, this is done already, and let's not see if that can happen again. I take exception to those comments. I think some very good long-range planning was done in the area, and there was actually no opposition to this. And neighborhood commercial is not the only zoning district that is consistent with this land use category. That information you received is not correct. A plan unit development can also be used, and we would encourage the developer to do that. And I understand that multifamily is desirable up in that area, and the property owner has even talked to me about that, as well as representatives of the Northwest, including Mr. Bashaw. I will also remind you that you're going to be seeing a pretty intense proposal in the near future for 7 Islands, and that's off Old Burnt Store Road as well, a 2-lane road.
Yeah, so thank you for that. And so one of the things that you kind of touched on was that, to my understanding, that we're currently selling as a city, not necessarily selling is a bad word, that there's this bright new commercial corridor going in the Burnt Store Road area. And you, in fact, are undergoing, I believe, some changes with staff to present some sort of plan moving forward with how we're going to approach that and particularly utilize that as to accentuate that growth on Burnt Store Road to a commercial corridor, so to speak. Is that correct?
That's correct, and that was economic development driven. The former economic development manager and I and Mr. Hernandez and Nita have talked at great length, and the planning staff, about what type of uses are there. We're creating a brand new land use category that you're going to see very soon.
Sure.
And you're going to see a brand new zoning district that has a variety of uses in there. Some may receive support, some may receive opposition, but we have to weigh all that and then give you the best recommendation we can on that as well. No doubt that is a major corridor and a 4-lane roadway that most of it was just widened, but we're not saying that Old Burnt Store Road is going to be a commercial corridor. What we're saying is that intersection is really to be treated as a small commercial node. That's what we're really saying. And 20 acres or so, even if this is approved tonight, is not a large piece of property for commercial development. And the fact that it doesn't touch Burnt Store Road is not a factor in our professional opinion, because in 7 Islands, I don't think some of the commercial, from what we've seen from the development proposal, is going to touch. It could be internal and still be very successful. Mrs. Tate is correct. You can't control what goes in there. We know that, and people tend to use the term worst case scenario. or worst case, for uses they don't want. Well, I may want something different from what you want at that intersection, or another resident of the area and so forth. We're just trying to plan for the area so that it might have a mix of uses that can serve the residents that's most effective, and we believe that that property already assembled for it, it wasn't split up into lots. That's something that was neglected during this whole presentation this evening. This land was neglected, and the reason that the piece in the middle that you're discussing tonight wasn't approved was because we didn't get a buy-in from the property owner at that time, and we would have created a non-conforming land use. Now they're coming forward and saying, yeah, we want to play. So that's why we left it out on purpose, which caused me a great deal of concern when we wrote the plan for the council at that time, but now the owner wants to change that. So I look at it as really a package of what could be in the area and how it could be beneficial. You know, we might have an owner that might come in and say, I want to take advantage of the mix that I can use in commercial activity center with commercial and residential, and not just do commercial. You know, I'm not arguing with what Mr. Bashaw said about the fact that the brand of neighborhood commercial is commercial, but it allows residential uses as well. And we would hope somebody would not use that zoning district, that they would use the planned unit development. Then you will have the say in what happens at that intersection.
Thank you. The reason for my question regarding the Burnstore Road commercial corridor is the fact that this is being sold as sort of this last commercial opportunity in that region for what is, I think, unopposed, predominantly single family in that particular region west of Old Burnstore Road. Yeah. And so, on the other hand, you're sitting here and we just discussed that there's a pointed effort to create a commercial corridor on Burnstore Road, which is a quarter mile up the road on Kismet there from the site that we're particularly talking about now, as the last hope for all commercial humanity in that region. And so that's where I'm a little bit confused with why it's so important that we need only a quarter mile off of this concerted effort on Burnstore Road to create a commercial corridor, this particular unit here that's surrounded entirely by 100% single-family homes to maintain its commercial nature.
And the answer is, and I apologize if I wasn't clear a minute ago, was to create more nodes at intersections. That was the mandate we were given, to do that. Because,
that was your task at the time, is what you're saying?
No, 4 years ago.
Correct, right, at the time.
Right. We were given that mandate, and it was because there may still be opportunities for development at those intersections to serve the neighborhoods and do that. I know when people say the last great hope, I mean, people have a lot of reasons for saying that, because you forgot hodgepodges of commercial development along Chiquita and Skyline and different roads like that. We have a mix of single-family, multifamily, duplexes, and commercial. We have a lot of discussions internally about having a different land development pattern develop along Burnstore, because there's a lot of undeveloped property, and I think the community wants that, and we really need input. Mr. Bashaw was absolutely right. The planning process is really a tripod. It's what the professionals give you, it's what you want as elected officials, and it's what the community wants. That's what it's about. That's what we want. We want public comment. I merely embrace the fact. I wish there were more speakers here this evening. But you have to understand, though, that we try to give you the best recommendation up front, and not everybody is going to necessarily like it. But that was our thinking back then. That was the mandate. It was to create more nodes of commercial centers so we can have more compact development and not spread out like you have it along Chiquita and Skyline, which in some people's eyes is a fine thing. They like that. But you have very small nodes and it's very scattered. There's nothing central to it along those roadways. We were trying to do that, but we didn't know at that time how Burnstore was going to develop, or what the pattern would be, or what ownership patterns would want, owners would want, and really whether or not there would be a market for commercial or residential, for that matter, multifamily. We've been surprised very much about areas where we've put commercial and the market hasn't taken place. You had that discussion at your last meeting. What, the alleyway discussion, and Councilmember Tate talked about that, the zoning and the land use and all that. That's a prime example on Del Prado. You know, we've had land use and zoning going back and forth. Now they're consistent in that particular area, but the market hasn't responded. So we don't know what's going to, we can put the best plan out on paper on Birchville, we don't know what's going to happen. It might happen 20 years from now. We don't know. That was the thinking, though, and I hope I answered it. I don't know if that's satisfactory to
Yeah,
you,
you
but I
did.
answered
Yeah,
it.
just one last question here, and then I'll pass it along. You were pretty quick to point out with regards to future activity on Old Burnt Store Road, the impending potentially 7 Islands development, and what that might mean for growth on that road. Aside from that, is there any other parcels on Old Burnt Store Road that you could identify as being commercial?
Well,
I know that's not commercial, but you're saying as far as growth, so presumably that's going to be a bustling street that justifies this commercial intersection here at Old Burnt Store and Kismet. So,
No, I was just trying to make a point that there was a comment made that there's some land here that doesn't abut Burnt Store Road. I find that insignificant.
okay. My point is that entire road is single family. Is that correct? For more or less?
Most of it, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Shepherd.
I just want to thank John for all his research and his passion with our city, and most of all, being a visionary. I think a lot of us have to start being visionaries, because even we look at our city as being so big, and we say we're only half built out. There's not a lot of these properties left, and we don't want to make the mistake of the wrong things happening. And we can't control it all, which is unfortunate, but having a vision and having a clear path will help us. I see a lot of decisions on other pieces of property sometimes, and the decision is based on what's happening today. And is all I want to say as a council person, that our decision making shouldn't be all based on today. That should be part of our decision making. The other part should be the overall vision of the city. That we have to think about that as well. The last thing we want to happen is an area to build out and then have to go back into that community and try to redevelop and try to tear things down and make repairs. I think it's important that we all, not just look at today, but look at tomorrow as well. So I just want to thank you. I hope the wind doesn't come out of your sails. I hope you keep doing what you do. I see you as an asset to the citizens of your area, Northwest, and you keep up the good work. Thank you.
Councilmember Welsh.
Thank you, Mayor. Couple quick questions or just observations. So they're talking about making it, the new Surfside Boulevard. Is there any commercial activity on Surfside Boulevard currently in the city of Cape Coral? Commercial properties on Surfside, yes.
I'm not familiar.
I believe the whole Surfside shops is on Surfside Boulevard at that point, right? There's restaurants, there's a whole...
Well, it's in that shopping center at the corner, yeah.
Yes, so, and then also on Kismet, there is other commercial on Kismet. At Nelson, there's commercial at Chiquita and other intersections. So I don't want to, and my opinion is I don't want to remove commercial, especially with commercial activity center, because it does provide that ability to have residential as well as commercial, whereas a straight commercial zoning would not allow any sort of residential development. Am I wrong? Like something zoned commercial cannot have residential, but something commercial activity center could have commercial and residential together as a mixed use?
Yeah, it depends on the land use category first, and if that allows commercial to be mixed with residential, then the zoning would set that up. The commercial activity center land use does that. Neighborhood commercial is one zoning district that implements that. It was the only one until the code was readopted in 2019. You could create a planned unit development rezone and apply, but you would still have to be consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Okay. And I don't want to sound like I'm against the residential area up there. I do think that it is a nice part of Cape Coral, but I do see the need for us to keep our commercial and be able to grow as a city. So I'm in favor of this moving forward. And that's all. Thank you.
Councilmember Long, do you have your light on? No. Any other discussion? I also want to thank Mr. Bashaw for coming forward tonight. You know, when I take a look at this area, and I've driven by this many times. For me, this area does not scream commercial. It's more of a residential area. But I think we have to take a look at what we have there today. If this particular hearing was to change this 20-acre parcel to commercial, my vote would be no. But when you have 80% of this parcel that's already zoned for CAC, and then the other 20% that's before us here tonight, it kind of makes sense if we make the whole area one zoning district. You know, so I believe this area surely should only be residential. But for whatever reason in the past, previous council had voted to make this area a commercial activity center zoning district. I agree with Mr. Bashaw. Moving forward, I think we have to make sure that we take into consideration what the residents want, and also what the needs of that particular community are. But I do believe I will support this tonight, mainly because 80% of this parcel is already zoned CAC. So even if we didn't pass this hearing forward, I think that you're still going to have this CAC designation on 80% of that area anyway. Any other discussion from council on this? Seeing none, we have a motion and a second, I believe. Madam City Clerk, please call the roll.
Tate?
Aye.
Welsh?
Aye.
Costin?
Aye.
Gunter?
Aye.
Hayden?
Aye.
Long?
No.
Nelson?
Aye.
Shepherd?
Aye.
7 ayes, 1 nay, motion carried.
Okay.